Um,
So Doug, what's
I
working
think I'm
well?
still trying to figure that out. Oh, there it is, the recording light, right? All
Yeah,
right,
there it is. There was a warning. No,
there was
I
a
just
warning.
liked it.
No, it's
I
good.
decided that I start hitting record whenever the moment feels right, because then it just gives it's a little on ramp.
Yeah, yeah,
You see
yeah,
you're on the highway, like, hey, we're on the on ramp, and then you can
yeah,
just like throw it in there, and it's real easy to trim, and someone tell a joke and then jump right into it. So
yeah, yeah.
um,
Well, I'll answer it first by saying what seems to be working well is website development for companies and business owners who know that they need a look, that they
right,
need to have a representation online that they can control, that they can have, like, for example, if your company is really large and you have a website, like, you might be legitimately busy and never touch your website for 8 years, but you look like you have your website, like it just looks like it's 8 years old, like they're not gonna,
right,
like, you're not gonna give that impression, right? So like if you're a multimillionaire and you still drive a 1998 Honda Civic, well, okay, that might be a personal choice. I guess it's an antique car at this point, but like,
yeah,
it doesn't give the persona of success, right? It doesn't give the persona of what you're trying to communicate about your brand. And so, keeping a website up to date is not just a matter of like having new information on there, but making sure that it
hmm
matches what you've done. A lot of people forget web because much of their marketing materials, possibly like direct marketing or emails, or actually just nothing that looks visual. It's just phone calls, right? Phone calls,
right,
emails back and forth with employees, things like that. So there, or it's just like vendor to vendor, and you've kind of got your established work, your work connections and your networking and stuff. So website can go to the back burner for a lot of companies. And right now, a lot of companies are saying, well, we have time to do that. We have time to invest in that. We have the money to invest into it. We need to stay relevant. I think there's this mentality that that a lot of people can easily have, that like coming out of the shutdowns in a lot of America right now and even the world, it's like, well, nobody has any money to invest in something like a website. And that's
right.
not really true. One, because I mean, personally, I've seen an uptick in projects. And part of it has to do with, we need to be relevant and stay relevant. And other people are even saying, well, we like our website, we just need to update it because we want to make sure that we are at the cutting edge when things are happening. When people are starting to buy more, we're gonna be ready, because we're gonna look like we're ready, because we are ready. So anyway, that's some of it
Right.
is working well also.
It's the people that are preparing now and able to see in other areas.
Yeah,
I'd say,
yeah.
like, the people that I think are being most proactive with web are, in the reality of their business, they're trying to make changes. They're trying to represent their new way forward. They're trying to
Hmm.
represent how they're responding to, let's pick a topic. They
Hmm.
want to be
Yeah,
relevant.
yeah,
And I like your, although they do the 98 Accord, though. I mean, that is a nice vehicle, but
yeah. Well,
what you're driving, whatever. No, I like the analogy that it's kind of maps up in people's minds, like the present
yeah,
reality
yeah,
of that consumer experience.
yeah.
I've talked to a few people recently. They're seeing a site or not, and it's either not up to date, or it doesn't have the relevant for right
Yeah,
now, the relevant
yeah.
information for right now. And what we're finding is those people, everything went on pause operationally as well, or at least that's now, since that's so frequent,
Hmm.
that's the perception of the consumers. They're like, well, then what else is on pause? They're not open for business. They're not, what other
Right, right.
processes? It's either proactive, or they think it's a
Yeah.
complete parked car,
Well,
a parked
I didn't.
98 Honda again.
Yeah. Just go
So
with that.
it's
You
perception
and I
is,
have a mutual friend that drove an old Honda when we were in college.
oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah. So I'm not putting down any Honda owners. One thing that I do know, this wasn't a project by me, but one of my peers, he had a client that was a local company here who they did online orders. They were a bakery, and they did, like,
Mhm.
you had to order things by the dozen to do deliveries. And what ended up happening was they would like have to like go through and verify that these are legit orders and stuff by calling them, because they would get prank calls. People would order 5 dozen of what they were selling. And my friend was
Mhm.
telling me that, like, as sort of a web development partner for her business, um, my friend, he was telling me that they partnered together to create an online ordering system on their website to make it so that so that they wouldn't have to deal with like fake orders, because she didn't have
Hmm.
online in ordering. So website can actually serve you during time when like you have to have
Yeah,
opening hours, or you're doing deliveries
something
on Sunday.
different.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. And you
something
got to get
that's
really
a piece of information that's like you wouldn't have thought about that 6 months ago as being an issue.
yeah, yeah,
And that's a great example too, that that's a really specific use case for someone. But
yeah.
that is an example of, I think, a lot of people picture, oh, I need to get a website update. They're thinking, oh, this is just an aesthetic thing. Or they're
Right.
thinking they have a
Yep.
predetermined mind. Well, why do I need to redevelop my website?
Yeah.
Or they're
Yeah.
thinking it's all or nothing. What it could be is you're reassessing it and saying, well, look, there needs to be a COVID-19, if you're medical, COVID-19 update
Yep.
on
Yep.
services or
Yeah.
scheduling, or
Well,
I like
it also
a
interrupts your
new
whole email
tool
program.
for,
Like
right.
things like when you have people who are signing up for appointments, it possibly interrupts the flow of like how they receive emails even. And
Hmm.
so, one way I think of it, sorry, I interrupted you, but one way I
No.
think of it is that um, the a lot of people look at like an accountant and say, oh, well, you're just plugging in numbers and doing math quickly because I don't know how to do all the tax stuff or whatever. And really what accountants do is they're actually, if they're good, they're partners with your company to help you do well, to save money in certain places. And actually there's a lot of creativity in accounting that I've learned by observing my accountant a little bit. There's a lot of creativity in accounting, and I don't mean any like nefarious stuff, just like creativity in how you structure your business, how you pay your employees benefits and do all these different things. And just like that, if anybody knows, if any businesses watching out there watch their accountants be creative in their business, let me make that analogy for web. What I just said about my friend illustrates that they
That's going to
had
be a
to
great
get creative.
subject.
Yeah,
Right.
illustrates that they have to get creative with how they implement something. So yes, there is aesthetic going on. There is like, you got to have a web designer that can make your website look good, function well on all browsers and so forth, and be mobile ready and responsive. Although at this point, if you can't design it, like everybody designs a mobile responsive site, it just comes with
Right.
the package.
When
But
I hear someone talk about that as a major feature that they need or want, I kind of think like if you're
like,
mentioning it, it's kind of like maybe you missed the boat,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it
And,
reminds me. It
right.
reminds me when Apple released the Apple Watch, they made a big deal about how accurate time it took. It kept, and I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
dude,
that.
it's
Yeah.
a digital watch.
If
Like,
you're
why are
saying
you
that, I'm now
promoting this part?
scratching. Right now,
Like,
it kind of
so
erodes trust a little bit. Like, why are you
so
having to
yeah, yeah.
emphasize that?
Like, why are
Right.
why are you making sure we know that it tells
Right.
time? Like,
So
whereas
a mobile
Sony,
ready is kind of
yeah,
a like a
yeah.
that's a baseline now at this
Yeah, yeah,
point.
yeah.
But no.
Right. But the thing is, when you analyze a website with a web designer and a web developer, they can, and again, it depends on what your needs are as a business, help you think about your strategy with what is this website going to do? I mean, it's fine if you want me to build a website for you that's like, okay, this just looks terrible now because it was created in 2006 and we just haven't touched it because we've been too focused on other things, and it needs to look good. Okay, great, that's fine, I'll build that for you. But what really works well is when you partner with the company and say, all right, well, how is this actually going to not be an expense, but something that actually generates revenue or gives something to your
Right.
company that isn't like, oh yeah, we got to build a website, a couple $1,000s or whatever, like, no, you got to find a way to make your website make money for you. And I realize that that's not always the case. I mean, it depends on how your business is. I mean, sometimes it's just your photo gallery, you're a catalog or something like that. And there's different ways to make the money, and it's hard to see the direct ROI the way a bakery would.
Yeah,
But yeah,
they're seeing it physically in a different way than they should be. Maybe it's like
yeah, yeah,
the perception is this is an expense. I gotta dump it into this black hole of
yeah,
web
yeah,
or whatever I need to spend on marketing, and I'm never gonna get that back. Versus this is a dynamic conversation you're
yeah,
having with someone that's guiding. This is a you're addressing a point in your consumer's experience versus and talking about how that can functionally happen. You
yeah,
mentioned like
yeah.
if this is a tweak to the ordering and scheduling system, or if it's a moving around certain information you might already have there. I find
Hmm.
that I don't know, I don't want to say half, but I want to throw out a lot
Yeah,
of successful web projects. It's moving around, reevaluating the placement, the location of certain information that may already be there,
Yep.
And it's just matching up with this is now a layer your consumers experiencing. Let's have a talk about what that looks like, since
Yeah.
they will be on the web, your people, new and returning customers. So I think it's more a matter of like, hey, like the conversation you're having isn't about like nailing the design or about getting just the perfect. It's about like, let's talk about what's happening right here, right before someone either gives you money or books an appointment. And that's going to be called a website discussion, you know. And I would, at that point I would say, and here's Doug, is trying to do that. But
well,
if
one thing,
people could
and here's
switch
how
that
I would,
perception in their mind, that would be a good start.
how I would continue that conversation would be basically saying, one thing you can't assume is that the customer knows what to do or knows what you want them to do. And sometimes people go to a site, and I've actually evaluated sites that I've built, you know, a handful of years ago or whatever. I'm like, oh, I kind of missed the mark. I know, you know,
You're
I
like,
learned
that
some
was
lessons.
cute.
Yeah, that, well, and it still
Right.
is cute. You know, the one I have in my head, I'm like, yeah, that website works really, really well, but it can be a little bit difficult to find the right information. It's like, oh, we didn't think about that because we know that that would be important. And also things change, right? So the things that you add on your website might become really popular, but you didn't think about that when you built the site. You're like, oh, and it could be something as really simple as just making it a link on the homepage. I mean, it doesn't have to be this restructuring or whatever, but it's a matter of thinking about what customer journey do you want? What do you want? What journey do you want your customer to have?
Right.
What can you expect your customer to not know and to know? Because, and I say this delicately, your customer doesn't know as much as you think it does, right? The customer is not always right. The customer is not always knowledgeable. Sometimes going to a website, it feels like you're entering a world with a different lingo and you know, language. I mean, if I went to a website selling me engineering CAD drawing software, I would feel very out of my element. Whereas both my brothers-in-law, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, we understand all this." Like, and so obviously your audience matters, and they're not, you know, those websites are not for me to be figuring that out. But communicating to your customer what it is that they need to do, giving them a plan, like, hey, here's 1, 2, 3, here's what it looks like to do business with us. That's gonna really go a long way, because people can't spend the mental calories to calculate, well, okay, so if I do business with them, okay, I'm exhausted, I'm gonna go check Facebook. I
How's
can hear you
that?
now. I can hear you now.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Well, hey, that consumer experience could be optimized. But you mentioned that, right? The battery life on these AirPods just has to go up to meet my busy schedule of
Yes.
Zoom calls. But you know, the mapping out the consumer experience when they are in, you know, they're in browsing mode, they're in research mode, they're on mobile, they're on the go. Nailing that and having a conversation about that, again, for where we sit as marketers, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that perception of there are business owners, that all business owners are marketers, is my belief. All entrepreneurs need to be marketers. Helping them understand that, you know, nailing that isn't necessarily also isn't going to be as hard as they think. It could be, it's an evaluation process. Like our 1, 2, 3 would be like, hey, it's an evaluation process, making sure that this conversation with the web design, web development team, what are we even going to be talking about? Our 1, 2, 3 would be like, hey, understand you're having a conversation about your customer's journey, not about a web design. You know, come prepared with, like you mentioned on a couple conversations we've had, just coming prepared with, like, what is the story what is the action you're really trying to get them to take? You're the customers of the entrepreneur wanting to build a website. And then I think, you know, there could be other things we could fill in on a 3 or 5.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Some of the big three would be like those couple things, and then just some simple like expectations on the timing, for instance, or what happens when we run into additional things that come up, maybe like how to just approach logistically or financially, even just getting those things out. To me, that's about really.
Those parts of the conversation can be like, kind of, a lot of people look at those as like, oh, these are all the details. And a lot of people who are like really on the go, and they're like, yeah, but I need this website, and they want to have these meetings. The way I approach it is, I pretty much tailor the style to what the customer needs. I know that sounds so cliche and typical, but honestly, I'm capable on both ends, right? So I'm capable of being like, hey, Doug, go take this website. I don't really care about the design. Just use our branding colors. and just make it look really good. And I can do that, no problem. Or there's other people who are like, yeah, show me a bunch of mock-ups and we're going to decide exactly what to do.
Right.
Okay, I can go
Those
on
are
that end,
two
right?
very
And they
different
won't just really know.
processes.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
they're both very easy, but if someone thinks they're doing one and it's the other, to me, like it's those little things that then you're off a mile in a month.
Well, and here's
Right?
the thing, like website development it can be a very customized, long drawn out process to like really fine tune everything. And that depends on the industry. It depends on the company. It depends on the person in charge of the company, working with us, working with me. So the other part of that conversation is things like, if you need me to sort of like take the ball and run, then I can do that. I can't make up your company copy for you unless you're paying to do that, or unless I know about how to do that.
Right.
So I just can't make stuff up. I need information and materials. But outside of that, it's like, yeah, sure, I can take it and run, or I can be a partner that like goes a long way. I've done this, a handful of clients. Let's see, in 2020, I've had one in maybe 7 to 10 clients who like wanted to know what it was going to look like well before we even started.
Right.
And it was like really like, no, I want to make sure it looks good before we hire you and so forth, or before we like jump into the full process. So there was that. But most of them are like, yeah, we've seen the work you've done, and we know you're going to develop a good website for us, and then let's talk about what is it going to do. Okay, so the doing part is really the point. And honestly, when you have someone like you or me on a call with somebody to talk about what is their website going to do, we've already gotten through the process of
we've
knowing
gotten to that point already. Yeah.
And we've gotten to the process with the customer that we know their industry, or we know what they're aiming for in their industry and what they're aiming for their website. And therefore we kind of, that conversation becomes a little bit more natural, as things are brought on. So like if especially if it's a client that's getting an update on a site that you did 4 years ago or 5 years ago, it's like, oh, well, hey, you catch up a bit, you figure it out. You're like, hey, we're going in new directions, and now we're going to do this with our website. We really, really want to do this. So the other thing is, I'll just add a little thing there is, I have actually had people come back to me and say, okay, I think we're ready to do this with our website, which is what was this part of a conversation that was happening 4 or 5 years ago. And they were like, yeah, well, it's not what we need right now. And then and then their business needs changed, or maybe they're finally, ready to devote energy to it. And so now it's like, all right. And to some extent, it's like, yes, I'm excited because, it was part of the plan in the first place. And now you know that what you've set them up for is success down the road, to just keep building and to keep growing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that it's all about, you said it's all about keeping them building, keeping them growing. So just to me, just to summarize, what is, this ongoing conversation of like the web, what's working well, what's a good web development or web design experience. It's really just focusing around like that evaluation process of what is that next step defined for the entrepreneur. Great example, some recent startups where it's like, the thing that is really next step for this one business is they just need truly, a landing page so that they can highlight some other next steps they're eliciting in their early journey. Where another one, it's like you mentioned, a feature. It's a more robust, and it's like, hey, now let's flesh out this. We've got a different budget or a different project now. Versus, something even bigger. It's all about whatever that next step is. And I think that's an area that we want to just keep exploring of, as far as different targets, what is the next step, and some example next steps for different types of businesses. Like, here's some things you could do. If this is where you're at in business, here's a really easy next step. And I know that you come up with ideas like that all the time. What are some really easy next steps for, let's say, a small entrepreneur, a small business, an entrepreneur, or someone making a pivot? What are some things like web-wise, either to prep, we talked about some prep things, or some quick things they can do on their own feasibly to kind of take their web and maybe one step forward, just like to leave people with a tip, something they can action on.
So the very first thing that I tell people is that your marketing and your website is not about you. It's about your customer. And it's about making your customer feel like the hero in their life, in their journey. Okay. And you are there to guide them to success. So that's one way to flip the script. Everybody says, "Oh, how do we make ourselves look really, really good on our website?" Well, you do that by telling them how you serve the person visiting really, really well, and how you give
Yeah.
them a better identity, or a better solution, or a better life, a better outcome, a better, whatever. We talk about, people in marketing talk about, you solve a problem and you show that person, right? So how do you begin to think about yourself as not the hero solving all the problems, but the person who helps the hero, which is your customer? So
Them
that's a
be
tricky
the
thing
hero.
to think
How
about.
do you
Yeah,
help them be the hero? So it's maybe some mental prep work
it
is the big
is.
thing.
Yeah,
How do you
yeah.
help your
So that's
customer
the
be the
first thing.
hero here?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's the first thing. And so the second one is sort of write down like what it is that you do that serves your clients, like what sets you apart. You and I have a friend, Lee, who always
Yeah.
wants to make sure that people know the soul of their business, and that is so true. I think it's very, very easy. Everybody who's in business for longer than 20 seconds knows that you can work in the business and you work on the business. And to some extent, working on a website is working on the business, because it's about communicating who you are. You're putting yourself out there for the entire world to potentially see, or your client world. And so it's a little bit of working on the business going on there. So if you have methods that you're already thinking about, maybe you already have a mentor, maybe you already have somebody that thinks about, okay, Nathan, you're going to work on your business for 3 hours every week, and I'm going to double check and keep you accountable to that. And here's your method, and here's the book you're going through. Like, doing the work on your business is going to go a long way. And that actually kind of dovetails with the whole first point about being the guide
Right.
instead of the hero.
Right. Helping your customer be the hero.
Yeah, yeah.
I
And
mean,
and I
what do you want them to do and how, I
yeah,
think it's a lot of mental prep work.
yeah. Well, I'll add one little thing there, because I could potentially see a downfall in me saying all that, is that people who watch this are like, yeah, I should go and work on my business, and then call Doug and Nathan in 6 months. And then
That sounds like
part of it,
that sounds like a perfect outworking. That's a great next step.
no, that's
Just
it.
sleep
So
on
what I
all
mean,
this stuff. Think about your customers a bunch. That was a very
no, my
nuanced
point,
way of saying it really takes some deep thought. It's more about the
yeah,
positioning of what you want to do in your business, in your actual operation of your business,
yeah.
versus
Well, what
just
I meant to
nailing a design.
Yeah, no, I agree. And what I meant to correct was the potential thinking of like, well, I have to go away and not think about the website until I kind of come back and work on the business. And it's like, no, we can do that with you.
Right.
Like, it
Right.
kind of all goes together. The best way of I just literally right before we recorded this taught my son how to mow the yard. There's no amount of theory and texting with him and telling him and explaining to him
Right.
that will help him learn how to mow the yard. You just do it. And sometimes
Right.
I have found for clients that the process of building a website is part of them working on the business in some ways about their marketing and messaging. It's
It's
inevitable.
a great exercise. Yeah,
Yeah.
rolling up the sleeves and actually having the screen up there, having some designs, having some images, having some. I love it in our
Yep.
office,
Yep.
having the whiteboard here, the screen here, and like you just said, the process itself isn't a throwaway. It's a great
No,
process when
it's,
you're working with
it's,
a good guide, and you
yep.
see you understand the conversation that's happening versus just like
Yeah.
it's the thing you're going to throw money at.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
comes back to this. It's so much about that. You're nailing something that's actually a valuable thing to do in your business. It's a great
Yeah.
exercise.
It
So,
is. Well, that's how people like you and I can help with businesses, is like we're skilled in the room or in the Zoom room, if you will,
yeah,
in helping people figure out, because I mean, that's what we do. We're the guide to help them become
right,
successful.
right. I think that's a great place to end. And I know that we're going to have some more conversations about some tools. I think it would be great to explore some more specifically about some specific, we'll say, personas. Like if you're this type of business or you're in this type of situation, here are some actions or here's some things to consider. Doug, I know that you design sites of all different kinds. We've worked on a whole bunch of things now at this point. What would you say, right now for middle of the road, like what are some things that businesses can be thinking about as far as budgeting, investment in web, You know,
Hmm.
we're always open and clear about pricing. And when we're doing a consulting project and building a
Yeah.
strategy, we always like to have all those things out on the table. If not getting into specific pricing, just thinking, helping people understand, facilitating the process getting started might not be what
Yeah.
they think. And it could be structured in a lot of ways: flat rate, hourly,
Yeah.
scare, different sprints. Talk about like approaches of just getting it done and what that could look like financially for someone.
Yeah. So if you have a lot of work sort of done already, so there's kind of two ways to, well, there's more than two ways. I shouldn't say that. There's a number of ways to approach it, and sometimes it has to do with like where you are in the process. So for instance, if you're like, I have a landing page in mind and I could type it out on Word, on a Word document and notate where I want some really cool images, that's not going to be expensive depending on a number of other factors. Okay, as opposed to a company that has tons of galleries and you want to think through like, how do you want to best convey stuff, and it basically means having a conversation with a person, with a web developer who knows sort of like the best technology to take care of what it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
And
So
so
more like
there's that.
finding the right tools and putting
Yeah,
together
yeah,
what
so that's
all,
going
and
to
there
take,
might be a lot of them.
yeah, and that's going to take a lot of like creativity and conversation. I think one of the pitfalls that a lot of people do have is that they have this sense of like, well, all it is web pages. And so if I just write down, here's what I want on each page, then that will all sort of be communicated. My designer will go off and design each one of those pages. And then he'll come back with me, or she will come back with me and say, like, here, what do you think? And we'll go back and forth. That does happen.
Right.
But a lot of times it's a little bit more integrated, where you have a conversation about the actions and the functions of things. And so what you're paying for in many ways is a lot of creativity to get your business, to make your website an investment, not an expense.
Right.
Okay. And so at least that's the way I approach it. I don't want this to just be like, hey, give me money and I'll give you something that looks good, and you'll call me in 5 years because you liked me 5 years ago. That's fine, obviously. I'm happy to do work. But what I really like is when we can partner together to like see the success and be like, all right, we have a plan here that's going to actually get clicks, get purchases, get phone calls, whatever, get, investments, whatever it might be
Right.
that your website is doing. So back to the broad question, to sort of go back to the actual question you asked. In terms of expenses, I think it depends on where you are in the process of um, implementation. So if you've got all your ducks in a row, if you will, like I said, then that's probably going to be less costly unless there's a lot of creative expectations that you're not aware of. So, but then there's the other end of the spectrum. It's the whole partnership. And sometimes people want to do like, hey, we know that this website's going to take 3 to 4 months or even longer because we want to think it out. And we know that those are going to be, lots of phone calls, lots of questions with our design team or with our like engineering team or something like that. And so people kind of know that like, okay, let's just do monthly, and so to spread the payments out, if you will, but because it's going to cost that much anyway. And so, yeah, I mean, it all is flexible. I mean, I don't know a whole lot of people that aren't going to work for money, if it's the right amount. And so I think that in terms of structuring the payment, it makes sense to do what's right for both partners, both parties. So I typically I work with, a little bit of a down payment, do the job, pay me when it's done, kind of thing. But it all depends on the client. If you need a rush job and it's not super easy to do, like it takes a lot of that creative work, then you're going to get a lot of my time, but it's going to be a little bit more costly. But that might be worth it, because if it's a rush job, it might need to be rushed for a good reason. So
Right.
again,
Yeah,
I just keep
whatever that
going back.
next step is, like they have orders, they have investment. We've worked on things where, there's some really important next step in the business, where, it really matters that their presence is on point for a specific meeting even. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's a matter of coming to the table and realizing, I think to summarize, Doug, it's no one can escape that you're getting what someone's paying for is the creativity and in most cases the creative time needed to pull it off. So
yeah,
if something's straightforward and it's like, hey, I'm already a creative entrepreneur, I've got my messaging nailed, I know what I want, and I just need that presence. Well, not very expensive. And I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors with how things get priced. if someone thinks they're paying for a platform and it's just really easy and they can just flip it on, probably not a lot of heavy tech behind it and just an aesthetic thing. Sometimes that's good enough. But sometimes, again, you mentioned if it's the time spent creatively thinking through the process and what's needed and things that haven't been thought of yet, then really that web process, that's more than just a web process. It's a creative process to get everything on that consumer journey thought through so that it can be manifested online. So I think it comes down to like it's paying for creativity and in varying doses. And I know, again, referencing the projects we've worked on, very straightforward. For anything that we're recommending, I think that the way to move forward and your approach is it's fast, it's always clear cut, expectation management. If there's a scoring system, I'd say you measure very high on expectation management once in process with clients. So that's something I always like to get out there too. It's, again, it's the prep work that can get in that mindset, and then just managing expectations. Those are some of the things. We'll keep diving in more, but again, but there's never a good place to wrap up. We'll just keep rolling. But
that whole, like, you were like, hey, we're just going to end there. And then you asked me another question.
Just end there. And then I asked this one.
It's fine. It reminds me of like the preacher who's like got 3 points on a sermon and the third one's like twice as long as the first two.
Yeah. And then when they say, and then just in closing, you're thinking either, oh, great, or
you and I know about that.
We'll talk again really soon.
All right.
Doug, great working with you, and looking forward to more topics.
Thanks, man.